President Trump declares the Republican Party will be the party of health care. Everyone knows he's full of it.
What do you make of all this stuff, that Felix Sater is being brought in as this kind of Russian criminal mastermind?
All I hear outside is, "You're murdering your child." It was surreal that that was happening to me.
President Trump can no longer block his critics on Twitter after a federal appeals court rejected his lawyer's argument that his account is personal, not public. A 3-judge panel sided unanimously with the lower court that found by blocking those who disagreed with him, Trump was violating the First Amendment.
The bill is dead.
Hong Kong's leader admitted that her government's work on the extradition bill that protesters have been fighting was a, quote, total failure. But she stopped short of withdrawing the bill entirely, and protesters who are worried that she could revive it are vowing to demonstrate until she does. Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar had called his agency's rule forcing drug companies to show the list prices of medication in TV ads the most significant step of any administration towards healthcare transparency. Turns out it was a step too far. Hours before the rule was set to take effect, a federal judge blocked it, saying the agency doesn't have the authority. For a brief 17 hours, the pool of Democratic presidential candidates was down to a lean 23. Today, it's back to 24, after billionaire activist Tom Steyer sat in a modest hay barn and said he's running.
My name's Tom Steyer. I'm running for president.
His announcement comes 6 months to the day after he said he wouldn't run, to focus instead on campaigning to impeach President Trump.
The war over Obamacare went until its 9th season today, with Democrats dutifully playing the role of great defenders of the healthcare program.
Donald Trump and the Republicans want to take away your health care. We Democrats will keep fighting tooth and nail to protect Americans' health care for as long as it takes.
This season, the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit makes its guest star appearance as the case to invalidate the Affordable Care Act made its way in front of 3 judges today. Last December, a federal judge in Texas ruled that since President Trump's 2017 tax cut law eliminated the penalty for not buying health insurance, that made the individual mandate, which was the coverage requirement in the bedrock of Obamacare, unconstitutional. Without it, the judge ruled the rest of the law was invalid. That was quickly appealed to the Fifth Circuit, and that brings us to today, when 18 states, led by the Republican Attorney General of Texas, made their case again for why Obamacare is unconstitutional. A few seasons back, the federal government may have been in court defending the law, but the Trump administration isn't in that business anymore. So DC and 16 states led by California defended the law in court instead. We won't find out the Fifth Circuit's decision today, and while it's a pretty conservative court, it probably won't matter that much, because what they decide will get appealed to the Supreme Court, and perhaps Chief Justice John Roberts, who basically saved the ACA in the 2012 case, will make a different decision. I can't read into the future about that, but I can tell you that the future of health in the United States without Obamacare is complicated. First, there are parts of the ACA that people like a lot on the surface. These are the things that Democrats have been talking about for almost a decade now. Stuff like you can't be denied for coverage because of pre-existing conditions, and you can keep your kids on your health care until they're 26, and more people are now eligible for Medicaid. All these things would go away if the ACA gets thrown out. If you don't like Obamacare, you can think of it as a parasite that's infected everything. If you do like it, it's like a root structure in a big forest. It's going to be very difficult to untangle. At least that's what Linda Blumberg, who's a fellow for the Health Policy Center at the left-leaning Urban Institute, says.
There is, I think, a misunderstanding among some people that the Affordable Care Act is something that could be easily removed from the healthcare system. But in fact, it really constitutes, hundreds of changes that have been implemented in our healthcare system with hundreds of regulations, both at the federal level and the state level. Healthcare providers, basically in every sector of the healthcare system, have made changes and adapted to the presence of the Affordable Care Act over the last 9 years. So nothing springs back in place just because the court says the Affordable Care Act is no longer valid.
And many of the ACA's changes didn't just apply to public healthcare programs or the insurance people buy on the marketplace. If you're sitting there and thinking, my company has me covered, fun fact, The ACA also affects employer-sponsored health insurance.
The Affordable Care Act has barred annual and lifetime limits on coverage, and those also would go away. We've got the preventive services. There's requirements now for employers to provide break time in private places for nursing mothers. That's part of the Affordable Care Act.
Basically, the courts are going to do what they're going to do, and come 2020, both sides are going to use the court fight as proof that they're the party of healthcare. But if the law's eventually overturned, it's going to be a mess for everyone.
Today, the House Intelligence Committee finally got its chance to grill Felix Sater. The former Trump business partner skipped his date with them last month, using a classic excuse. He missed his alarm because he was sick. So the committee subpoenaed him. Despite Sater saying he'd answer all questions, the committee released a rare statement saying he failed to fully cooperate and didn't produce the documents they asked for. Sater has a long criminal history, but the reason anyone cares about him is that he's the member of Trump's network with the closest ties to the Kremlin. In 2015, he bragged that he could get a Trump Tower off the ground in Moscow, with help from Russian President Vladimir Putin. It's a long way from Sater's beginnings in Brighton Beach, Brooklyn.
The 80s was the most bloody years in Brighton Beach. Russian bad guys were these bandits, gangs from Brighton Beach who was shooting each other. It became more sophisticated after their sons graduated American universities. It was real estate. It was boiling rooms on the Wall Street.
Russian journalist Alexander Grant fled to New York in 1987. A former dissident who spent 12 years in a KGB prison, Grant is an expert in Russian organized crime. He has known the Sater family for 3 decades.
For me, Felix Sater is a bright American with a Russian background. It will explain everything. His father was a criminal, Misha Sater. Felix was growing up in his company, and he's been an American-educated guy with respect with Russian-speaking criminal father. So this combination produced him.
Felix got in trouble with the cops too. In 1991, he slashed a guy in the face with a margarita glass and served a year in prison for it. In 1998, he pleaded guilty for his role in a $40 million stock fraud scheme, backed by the mafia and Russian criminals. Sater later worked at the Bayrock Group, which is where Trump turned in the early 2000s for some much-needed funding. In 2001, he had become Trump's conduit to rich Russian businessmen. By 2009, he was a senior advisor to Donald Trump. Sater was deeply ensconced in Trump world and making ever grander promises. In an email to his childhood friend Michael Cohen, Sater dangled the possibility of a face-to-face meeting with Putin. The president claims he wasn't aware of these overtures, or Sater's criminal past. What do you make of all this stuff, that Felix Sater is being brought in as this kind of Russian criminal mastermind?
Well, I think that Felix Sater is a fantastic storyteller, better than anyone else.
He's a bullshitter.
Well, not exactly that, but something of that sort.
Sater might be a bullshitter, but he's bullshitted his way from underworld tough into something of a secret agent. When Loretta Lynch was a district attorney in 1998, she said Sater provided information that helped to convict 20 people. And in May 2019, federal judge I. Leo Glasser from the Eastern District of New York confirmed one of Sater's seemingly most preposterous claims, namely that he was involved in an operation that scooped up Osama bin Laden's satellite phone number on behalf of the CIA. He got into the Trump organization. This is what's amazing to me. He had a card that I'm an advisor to the president and was working out of Trump Tower.
So Felix Sater is an entrepreneur. Putting in the company of some person, he immediately started to build a staircase to success, being it Trump or Osama bin Laden or his late father.
But the guy who bragged about his connections to bin Laden and Putin is also the one who did time for slashing a guy with a margarita glass, which put Sater in the company of Michael Cohen, Paul Manafort, and allegedly Roger Stone, bridging an oddly familiar divide between small-time crime and high-level DC intrigue.
The bridge Felix Sater has been built between him and Kremlin has nothing to do with the politics. It was a commercial enterprise. He had some connections in Russia, some familiars in Russia. He speaks Russian. But I don't think it was politically motivated thing.
He wants to make money.
Well,
Ross Perot was a billionaire who in 1992 announced he was running for president.
I will not run as either a Democrat or Republican because I will not sell out to anybody but to the American people. And I will sell out to them.
He ran as what newspapers called a pint-sized populist. And in the process, he remade American politics. Running as a third-party candidate, Perot focused his campaign almost exclusively on economic issues, cutting the deficit, improving American competitiveness, reining in free trade.
If you're paying $12, $13, $14 an hour for factory workers, and you can move your factory south of the border, there will be a giant sucking sound going south.
Perot's politics didn't fit easily into a Republican or Democratic mold.
All these old boys that used to make a living taking polls are going to be looking for work selling peanuts or something when...
With his folksy cornball style, he appealed to fed-up voters from across the political spectrum.
Perot Petition Committee, this is Jan. May I help you?
Perot's campaign broke all the rules of modern politics. It was effectively built from scratch, had no meaningful get-out-the-vote component, and spent almost nothing on traditional advertising.
Here's the picture on our country's debt.
Instead, he spent $35 million on infomercials to showcase his ideas about the economy.
We got into trickle-down economics, and it didn't trickle.
And the amazing thing was that it worked.
It's like the guy that went into the hospital, thought he had a sore arm, found out he had gangrene.
Perot ended up getting 19% of the vote, the most of any third-party candidate since Teddy Roosevelt in 1912. Perot showed that there was a real audience for an economic nationalist message. 24 years later, Donald Trump borrowed Perot's rhetoric, but fused it with xenophobia.
When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists.
It was something Perot's spokesperson Jim Squires had warned of after the 1992 campaign ended. The next time the man on the white horse comes, he may not be so benign. He could be a real racial hater or a divider of people.
We terminated our pregnancy at 21 weeks.
I was between 15 and a half and 16 weeks.
I was exactly at 18 weeks when I terminated my pregnancy.
18 weeks for the first and 14 weeks for the second.
21 weeks.
22 weeks.
I was 20 weeks and 5 days when I terminated my pregnancy. Her diagnosis was so severe, we knew that she wasn't going to survive no matter which route we went. And so I remember at night I was laying in bed and I just said, she deserves to have a name.
We named our daughter Angelica.
Her name was Lola. His name is Carson.
We named our daughter Charlotte.
Our first one that we terminated was named Stephen. The last one that we terminated was named Rachel.
We were thrilled to know we were having a girl and decided on Naomi as the name.
I still, think of her as my daughter. We did not pick a name, and I still think about it every day.
A lot of what's talked about is, women who have unwanted pregnancies. But there are so many women who have wanted pregnancies, desperately wanted pregnancies that have to make really hard decisions, and this bill doesn't seem to recognize that at all, and neither do the conversations.
It's very triggering. I'm always on edge and feel like I have to share things that I'm really uncomfortable sharing just to help get it out that people can't be more wrong about a lot of this.
When I went through it 9 months ago, you know, I thought of myself less anti-choice than I probably would like to admit to. But when I went through it myself and I saw the support I got from my family, it helped me through it. But this bill just reignites everything, because people that I would like to be able to tell my story to, I feel would judge me and call me murderer.
When I was at the clinic when we were losing our child, and the nurse was trying to put the IV in my arm, and she was having trouble, so obviously that's uncomfortable. And all I could hear outside is, you know, you're murdering your child. My child who we prayed for years, that we finally had, and the fact, it was surreal that that was happening to me.
We found out at 18 weeks that our daughter had a lot wrong in the ultrasound for the anatomy scan.
At our 20-week ultrasound, we were told that our daughter had severe hydrocephalus, which is a buildup of fluid on the brain.
The baby had full trisomy 18.
It's a condition that is not compatible with life.
That our baby had chromosomal problems. The second one, she was already starting to die. She had heart failure.
We researched, like you can't imagine, day and night, you know, what would this look like if we were to try to go further in this pregnancy? What we were finding was just, you know, sadness. It was just usually pregnancies don't make it to full term.
If she had made it to term, she would have likely died almost immediately.
If I can make a choice where it's the best outcome for my child to not have to suffer, that's what I'm going to choose. And I will choose it every day, whether it's legal or not.
Years ago, we didn't have a big group for medical terminations. And I would go to other support groups, and they told me, don't talk about that because the other women get so upset.
There's been so many lies out there about babies being born with these fatal diagnoses and then being executed by a nurse or a doctor afterward of the discussion. And it's disgusting because that's not what that is. It's hospice, just like you would put your dying relative in if they had cancer. And the fact that that continues to be said is so disgusting and needs to be addressed. And like, no one's coming out and saying it. It's not even
so harmful
close.
and hurtful. I mean, I think that's when all of us really kind of bonded together, was after President Trump's speech, when he made that comment during the election cycles. And I think that's when all of us were just beside ourselves, because to imagine that's what anybody would actually want to do or do is just unfathomable.
No one seems to really factor in, I think, women's mental health. Like, if you think about, like, all of us have talked about the decision we had to make and the information we had to have and how quickly we had to do it. None of it hit me because I was having to go through it so fast. The impact it had on me psychologically, the impact it had on my husband, my child. Like, we were moving so quickly, and all of these laws, they don't consider how it's going to impact you and actually trying to grieve. I feel like we still grieve every day. I don't think it'll ever go away. It's losing a child. It's losing something that you wanted and loved, you know.
The decision we made was the toughest one we've had to make in our lives.
When you're pregnant and you have a baby, you yearn to hold them, to feed them, to nurse them, to put them to sleep. In my situation, there was nobody to hold. So, I mean, my arms physically ached. That's the best way I can describe it. I yearned to just hold and cuddle this baby that I had pictured in my mind and wanted so badly. I mean, I wasn't recovering from an abortion. I was recovering from a loss of a child. And I think that's what people don't understand.
Deciding to end a life that you wanted to bring into this world is immensely challenging. The other problem is, at the time, Georgia law gave us only a few days to make that decision. If we had had more time, our situation would have been different. We would have been able to probably gather even more information about her, although we felt comfortable that we had enough, or just taken some time to seek that support or go to therapy, or all the things that might have been really helpful from an emotional and mental perspective in making a decision like this.
We had 2 weeks. We felt extremely rushed with our decision.
We wish that we would have had more time, but I just felt pressure to make a decision, or
Right.
Yeah.
Or then you don't have a decision if
Yeah.
you wait too long.
I don't think I needed more time because I wish I made a different decision. I'm very comfortable with the decision that we made. I just wish we had more time to come to terms with what was happening.
When the news was broken to us that our baby was incompatible with life, and then in the same breath, these politics entered in where we felt forced to make a decision.
Quickly.
And I couldn't wrap my head around it, talking about legal termination. Well, what the hell does that mean? This is a medical decision for what's best for our baby. And so that felt like it had no place.
I remember when we were going to the clinic, I was nervous about being in a waiting room with women who had unwanted pregnancies, because we had a pregnancy that was so desperately wanted. And if I was going to feel angry at them, or if I was going to feel like they didn't deserve to have this choice. And he told me on the way there, he said, nobody wants to be there. That's one thing we all have in common. And nobody does want to be there. You don't know what the circumstances are.
I remember at one point feeling selfish because I wanted her. And so I thought I shouldn't end the pregnancy because I want her. I want her here. But then I realized it's not about me. And I need her. And I didn't want her to suffer.
Every single situation is so completely different and so completely unique that there just can't be a hard and fast rule or a bright line rule as to when you can and can't do this. Everything is so unique and everybody's factors are so unique.
We're fully confident that we definitely made the right choice.
I don't regret my decision to end my very wanted but unviable pregnancy.
Sometimes politicians paint this picture of these evil women that are just out there wanting to kill babies or something crazy like that. And this is what's real. We're a family that wanted our daughter, tried to have our daughter. And the reality is that all pregnancies are not rainbows and roses. And I think people need to start thinking about the real and not just this story about abortion, and look at the real people behind it.